if you don't get it right at the beginning of a murder, those first hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is, you can't get that time back. So there's a lot of pressure on you. And one of the things that you also know is that every decision you make and everything you do now at this early stage is going to be poured over by clever lawyers later on who are going to have months and months to second guess decisions you've had to make in seconds. So you've got all that pressure on you. And also as well, like, you know, it's like when you're driving blue lights and sirens, your adrenaline's going anyway. So your adrenaline's through the roof by the time you get there. And what we do in the UK, we train our detectives to use a system that, because you've got all that adrenaline going through your system, because you know that pressure's on you, you don't want to make mistakes, we use a system known as the 5 building blocks. So the first one, preservation of life. So obviously, the major thing in any police officer role is that preservation of life. We're there to protect people. So, and that may sound, well, they're dead. You've been called out homicide, but you have to think about things like, so if you were to go to a house and there was a dead body in the living room, well, have you checked upstairs? Do we know for a fact there aren't any other victims? Because you do end up at scenes where there are multiple victims, and the last thing you want is to have someone bleeding out upstairs because the police have just seen a dead body downstairs and haven't thought about it. So you're thinking about that.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. I think it's fairly obvious homicide investigation is where my true passion lies. So I'm really looking forward to today's episode because we're going to have a deep dive into the world of homicide investigation. So if you want to find out what really happens when someone gets murdered, I think you're going to enjoy today's guest. Today, I'm talking to recently retired Detective Inspector Steve Keogh, who had a decorated 30-year career in London's Metropolitan Police, including time in New Scotland Yard's elite anti-terrorism branch. However, for the last 12 years of his career, they were spent in Scotland Yard's murder investigation team. He has extensive knowledge of what it takes to catch killers and how to bring them to justice. And that's exactly what we're going to be discussing today. Steve Keogh, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thank you very much for having me on. A real pleasure to be invited on.
Well, I always enjoy talking to ex or current homicide detectives. I read your book, Murder Investigation Team, and how killers are really caught. And what jumped out at me reading the book was the similarities between the work that you guys do over there in the UK and what we do here in New South Wales. Very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose procedurally things might change, but catching a killer is catching a killer, isn't it? You're looking for the same type of evidence. You're looking for the same type of motives. The what's inside the killer's brain doesn't change if they're in America or they're Australia. So what's going to change is the nuances around procedure. But actually going after someone who's murdered somebody and catching them, it's going to be similar across all sorts of territories.
Yeah, most definitely. It certainly comes across in the book. The other thing that comes across in the book, and having the conversations I've had with you, is that I think you. It's fair to say, being a police officer, you share the passion I share for homicide investigation.
Yeah, mate, 100%. So I came into it quite late. I mean, you started a lot earlier than me in your career. I was about 18 years in when I first started it. And I think for me, it was that first time we were at court. And you know, it's like solving murders isn't easy.
Yeah.
Getting through all the procedure, through the lawyers first off to get a charge isn't easy. Then you're having to go prepare for court. Then you get to court and the defence. I mean, they try every trick under the sun, won't they, to try and get their client off. So it's a horrible journey for you. It's an even worse journey for the family. But when that first time when I was at court and that jury came back with that guilty verdict, honestly, I know you've been there and you know what this feels like. But it was a feeling that I'd never had in the police before, and I thought I can't. That moment, I thought I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
That feeling of getting that justice for that victim, for getting that, and you go outside and the family give you a cuddle and they're like, more often than not, they say something along the lines of, "Thank you so much. We feel like we can start to move on now," because they're stuck in a limbo whilst all this stuff is going on. Because losing someone that you love is bad enough for anybody. Losing someone through a murder is even worse. I mean, it's unimaginable. and just to feel that you can give them that I call it a gift, that gift of being able to move on. And once you once you've done that, I thought, mate, I can't. There's nothing else I could do in the police that's going to replicate that. So I stayed for the rest of my career.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of putting it, that helping those people, and it has to be the worst situation, absolute worst situation, when someone's been taken away like that, murdered, and quite often senseless murder, and you're trying to find some peace. I don't think the families ever get closure when someone's been
No.
murdered, but it helps in a way that you can get justice for the families. And I know what you're saying. Once I found homicide in my career, I found it very difficult to find the passion in other areas of policing. And I'm not putting homicide detectives better than other detectives or the general duties police, the uniform police. But from my point of view, it was the pinnacle of what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to do, and I spent as long as I could doing that, because of the rewards that came, the personal rewards, but you felt like you were doing something worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%. And the point you just made, I completely 100% agree with you. I never use the word closure, because that you often hear people say that they can have closure. Well, there is no closure when you've lost someone through murder, but it's that being able to allow them to start to grieve like we would normally grieve, but you can't really grieve when you know you've got this court case hanging over you.
Yeah.
And yeah, and again, yeah, I'm not saying murder detectives are better than anybody else, but for once you're doing it, job satisfaction is huge, isn't it? Especially when you're doing a job where you're committed to it so much that you sacrifice your personal life, you sacrifice time with your family, the long hours and lack of sleep, losing your hair. I mean, obviously a thing.
We both had hair
So
before we started. Yeah,
exactly, yeah, I've
good point.
flown locks,
Yep.
but but you do that because of that feeling that you get, and you go for all that crap.
Yep.
But by the end of it, when you sat there in court and you get that guilty verdict, everything is worthwhile. All the sacrifices you've made and your family essentially have made, you've done it because of. It always sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I feel like I found my calling. When I started investigating murders, it was like I found what I should be doing in my life, and as I say, and since leaving, I can't let it go. Everything I do is about talking about murder because it just becomes part of you, isn't it? You are a murder detective.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I don't think we're on our own. You speak to other the true homicide detectives, the passionate ones, and we all feel the same. That yeah, it was important work and rewarding work. And people would often say, was it worth the sacrifices that you made in your personal life and your own well-being, I suppose, to a degree, but the satisfaction you get and the reward you get back from the families, and I'm sure you're the same as I am. I stay in touch with some of the families that I work cases for, and they're like family to me now. It's just the nature of the beast when you work a homicide investigation. You got to put yourself in there 100%. It's not a 9 to 5 job, is it?
Yeah, and that is so true. When we were chatting before, and you said you were doing it for 20 odd years, I mean, I've got so much respect for that, Gary, because I did it for the last 12 years of my career, and it's changed now. But when I joined, you signed up for 30 years.
Yeah.
At the end of that, you can walk away with your pension. It's changed slightly now, and I was psychologically prepared that I knew I'd be doing it for a maximum of 12 years, and I could give my all
Yeah.
100%. And I always said if I couldn't do that, I would go and do something else because I think for those families and that victim, you have to be able to give 100%. But I would say by the end of my end of my career, I think I was spent. I think I'd given so much of myself and so much energy and so many sacrifices personally. If they said to me, "Right, you got to do another three," I think it may have broken me. Oh God, that's
Yeah.
it. And it wouldn't be fair for anybody. It wouldn't be fair for the victims. It wouldn't be fair for anyone. If I can't give 100%, then I shouldn't be investigating murder.
I
I've got to be on it. I was going to say that sometimes not everybody who investigates murders has the same attitude, and that was what some of the biggest frustrations I've ever come across. Where I was working with people that didn't have that commitment and couldn't see that bigger picture of what you're doing it for, and
yeah.
that used to really wind me up. And I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to be the one that gave it all, and if I couldn't, then I had to find something else.
Yeah, you brought up some interesting points there, and I know what you say. There were some points in time in my career, especially doing the homicide, where I thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I just, yeah, it was hard. I took 12 months leave away from the police, which was good. It sort of reinvigorated me, and I think that extended my stay in the police. But I got to the point where you became so accustomed to it, where a murder didn't challenge me or excite me. I thought that was the time to leave. But as my career played out, I ended up with investigations were a little bit different to ones I'd done before, and it sparked my interest, and I could find the passion. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that if you haven't got that passion for the work, you shouldn't be in homicide. And my saying was, we're not conscripts there. You don't have to be in homicide. It's not for everyone, and I fully respect and understand people that don't want to invest so much of themselves into a job if homicide is not their path.
Yeah, no, mate, 100%. There's lots you can do in the police, lots of different roles, and like I say, one of the things as well with murder, quite often you find yourself in a situation where it almost feels like you're the only one there for the victim. A lot of when you watch crime dramas and true crime podcasts, a lot of things, people make it this warped idea of what your average murder is. I know there's no
Yeah,
average murder,
yeah,
but more often than not, it's crime related in some way. There's some way that its victim's lifestyle has lent itself to the reason why they've been killed, and very often they're in their circle around them. I'm sure it wasn't, but it felt
yeah,
like they didn't care as much as we did. And quite often you felt like you were the voice for that victim. Like they're not here anymore.
yeah,
You might have, like, I've had family members that were with them when they murdered and don't help us. Best friends apparently don't help us, and you feel like you're the only one fighting for that victim. And yeah, it felt like a weird situation, but it was like I always found I don't want to overplay what I'm talking about here, but it feels like you're on some kind of mission for that victim, and it sometimes it literally feels like you're the only one that's fighting for them. That regardless of how they live their life,
yeah.
they didn't deserve to die,
Well,
and
I
that's
think
what
there
you're
was
doing it
something
for.
in your book, Steve, where you went to a funeral and there was only four people there, and it was you and your partner. And
Yeah,
I've been to a funeral where there was seven of us, and three of us were police officers working the case. And yeah, someone's got to look out for these people, regardless of
exactly.
how
I mean,
their
in that
their
situation, the vicar said to me, "Do you want to say any words?" I was like, "Well, I mean, I literally had never met the person in my life. I
yeah
feel like I knew him because when there's a saying in murder investigation, to understand how a person died, you have to understand how they lived. So
yeah
it's about building up a picture of someone's life in order because generally there's someone or something in their life that would be the reason why they were murdered.
yeah yeah
So you do, although you never meet these people, you delve so far into their lives. It was almost like you do know them. They almost become like
yeah
this sort of pseudo friend because you know so much of their life. You probably know more about their life than most people do, like I've ever done. But that was a weird situation, yeah, being there,
yeah.
just
I can
us.
imagine.
It was quite sad, really. It was really quite sad.
Yeah, you like to think a life carried more, but yeah, it's just the circumstances people find themselves in. Before we break down homicide investigation, because as I said at the start, I want to take a deep dive into the nuances of homicide investigation, get your thoughts on things that I think people will find fascinating. But let's just a little bit about yourself, your career, where you worked, and your background. A little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I joined really young. I was 20. And I grew up on, we call them council estates in the UK, like social housing type places. I
Yep.
always lived on those as a kid. So my mates tended to go the other way rather than the police. And no one in my family had ever joined the police. So it was a bit left field when I did it. But when I left school, I did an A level in accountancy, and I thought, coming from a poor background, I was like, well, this could be a bit of money in here, so I'll go and do some accountancy. Oh, Gary, it was so boring. It was so boring. And we had offices at the back of the Old Bailey, the main court in London. And I used to see the comings and goings of the police. They bring the terrorists in with blue lights and sirens and convoys and everything. Wow, that looks so much more exciting than what I'm doing. So I ended up applying for the police. Got in about 2 weeks after my 20th birthday, and then I got posted to where I grew up. And I went to quite a rough school, so I ended up nicking people I went to school with, and so it was a bit of a tester. But I strongly believe this, right? So I one of my bosses said I took it to like a duck to water, and the only reason I'm saying it is because I was basically policing the people I grew up with.
Yeah.
So I could spot a criminal a mile off, like of from my demographic, from my area, I could spot them a mile off. Because I knew them, I grew up with them. I played with them at school. You know what I mean? We all
Yeah.
grew up together. If not that person, then someone like them, and it allowed me to sort of I hit the ground running in terms of I knew the area, I knew the people, so I could then concentrate on targeting. And I just found this passion for chasing a criminal. So even when I was in uniform, when I came on, it was about going out and trying to find a criminal.
Yeah.
I literally would just pick up some car keys, go out, and it was a bit like a game. I was out there hunting criminals, and I think when you do that, it sort of pulls you down a route of being a detective because you then want to chase the more serious criminals. Yeah, I might nick someone for burglary, but or what about if I can nick them with an armed robbery, or what about if I can nick a murderer? What? And you're always trying to up your game in terms
Yeah.
of who you're chasing. So that's what dragged me. I ended up in terrorism and murder, and that's so everything I did from the first time I came out in uniform to when I was at the Old Bailey convicting murderers. It was all the same thing for me. It was all
Yeah.
about catching that criminal. And as I say, you just sort of you end up on a path, and I'm sure it's very similar for you, Gary, in how you ended up in homicide and what was motivating you, I'd
Yeah.
imagine.
Well, I like the use of the word hunting, and people might say, "Oh, that's a bit strong. You're talking humans," but you were hunting. You in
Mm,
homicide, I was hunting the killer, and
yeah,
that's the type of. And I don't think it's too strong a word. That's what you're actually doing. So I do understand where you're coming from, and in your book, and that's why I thought, okay, I know what this bloke's about when you talk about hunting, and that was the thrill of the chase and finding out what's happened. Now, people can probably put it in more noble terms than that, finding truth and justice and all that. But when it all comes down to it, and a lot of detectives that I know, detectives I've had on the podcast I haven't worked with, I've had quite a few of them refer to it was the thrill of the hunt. That's what
yeah,
we're doing, and I think that does drive you, and you got to have that. I believe that competitive edge. This person, I would, and I know the common, the PC thing is, oh, don't let it get personal, and I get told you're too passionate, but I deliberately made it personal when I was on a case. It was personal to me, and I think it helps you and drives you as a detective.
100%, 100%. No, I used to do some of my best detective work in bed,
Yep.
which sounds weird, but
Okay.
I
Well, we could
literally
explore that. Yep.
well, yeah, but I literally never switched off. So you said something about did you say it was competitive? So I'm a
Yeah.
very competitive person. I hate losing,
Yeah.
and that's what it felt like if I didn't solve a murder. I'd lost and I hate losing. So I was, you come home and even though you finish work, you're still thinking about it. And when I was in bed and sort of all the other noise is gone and you can just concentrate, so many times I'd be laying there and something would spark in my mind about a line of inquiry that we could follow or something we could do or someone we could speak to or
Yeah.
some tactic we could use. And quite often I come in the next morning and I'll be like, right, this is what we're going to do to the team. We're doing this, and it's because my brain was able to just really fully concentrate on it, and you don't switch off. It's a constant. Once you've picked up a murder, all right, it's you don't just investigate one, so you'll get one, then you
Yeah.
get another, then you get another. So it's difficult to always put your concentration on that one murder, but there'll always be one that's the focus on your mind, and it does kind of take over your life, and I think, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's what makes us better homicide detectives than someone who's just going to come along and think, as you say, you could do a 9 to 5. You can't do
Yeah.
that.
You can't do that. And I look, I'm not saying it would make you a great partner or a person to live with, but I understand understand what you're saying. You would carry it home. It was 24/7. Like you're on a job and you're thinking about it, and sometimes you'd come up with an idea you hadn't thought about, and you couldn't wait to get up and get to work the next day, or you'd go in on your day off and start following that line of inquiry. It takes a bit out of you, but if it's your passion, it doesn't feel like work, and that's what I would say to people that it was my passion, so it didn't feel like work. And that, well, why are you in on your day off? Well, this is what I do. This is what I've signed up for. And yeah, It's an extraordinary job. I always thought the crooks were in more trouble. The bad guys were in more trouble when my relationship was in a bad position or I wasn't in a relationship because that's when I had nothing to distract me and just concentrate on okay, let's crack this case. The murder investigation team. Just can you break it down? In New South Wales, we have our major crime squad, and that's sits over the top of it. And then we have our break up of squads. We have the armed hold up squad, the sexual assault squad, the homicide squad, the fraud squad, that type of thing. Explain the role of the murder investigation team in the new Scotland Yard that you're part of.
Yeah, so in the UK, there's a system where we use they always have different names. We call them a murder investigation team. There could be a major crime team, but
Yep.
the structure is the same because we follow a manual across the country. And essentially, it's a team that will investigate murders. It wouldn't be individual detectives.
Yep.
And they would be made up something along the lines of this. So you'd have a detective chief inspector,
Yep.
a couple of detective inspectors, about 4 detective sergeants, and roughly 18 to 20 detective constables.
Yeah.
And so in that, all of those will have different kind of responsibilities. And I use an analogy of a car. So if you think of how a car works, so the detective constables are the engine; they drive it. So they're the people that are doing the what would we consider the police work. So they're doing the taking the statements, arresting people, looking for CCTV, becoming a family liaison officer. So the detective work. And that's the engine. That's the engine that drives it. And then the sergeants are like the pedals. They regulate the engine, make sure it's working properly, make sure it's not going too fast, make sure it's not stopping.
Yep.
And then the DI and the DCI is like the steering wheel at the top, and they're directing the car in which the directing the investigation, in which way are we headed. So that's the kind of roles it is. So if you're a DI DCI, it's about sitting up top and looking at which direction that it's going in. The DSs sort of straddle both. And I've got to be honest, that was my favourite role as a DS because I could get my hands dirty, and I had that overall sort of control. Because when it was my job, it was me that would take it to court as a DS.
Yep.
And then the DCs would do that work, and it does work really, really well. So everybody, when a murder breaks, everybody will have their own roles and responsibilities. So you will have an officer that's designated as the exhibits officer. So it'd be those that would go into the crime scene and take out the evidence from there. You'd have a CCTV officer. We use family liaison officers, a really important role where they're the earlier one when I was talking about building up a picture of a victim's life to try and solve the crime. The family liaison officer is pivotal to that because they're going into those that are closest to the family, closest to the victim, to try and build up that picture. So every single role, every strand in an investigation is separated off to an individual officer. And it does work really well. It works really well. Obviously, the important thing of that is team meetings so that everybody, you've got 25 detectives all running off in different directions. They need to come back and you'll have regular team meetings so everybody knows what everybody else is doing and how their strand fits in with the overall
want to talk about those briefings in the importance of those. The murder investigation team, so your sole responsibility was responding to murders and investigating murders. That's the makeup of the team.
Yeah. We also had responsibility for a couple of other things. So high risk missing persons. So if someone had gone missing and there's a real fear that some harm had come to them, then we'd take on those. And also linked series rapes. So the idea being that normally the officers that investigate rape normally would be singular officers on their own. And if you've got a linked series, a serial rapist across boundaries and various crimes, it would come to us because we would have the resources to properly investigate it.
Yeah. Okay, well, again, not dissimilar to what we had here. At one point in time, we were called homicide and serial violent offenders, and that was for serial rapists that we would target on the homicide team. We've sort of separated a little bit, and our main focus is homicide. You have an on-call response. Over here in New South Wales, we're on call every 6 weeks. So your team, which was our team, would be a detective inspector, 2 or 3 sergeants and 6 constables. That was a team. So every 6 weeks, you'd be responsible for responding to any murder that happened or suspicious disappearance. Is that the similar type of role that the murder investigation teams had, being on call?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So there are 20 in London. There are 20 of these murder teams,
Yep.
and geographically they're split. So London's split into four quarters, and mine was southeast. So people would have heard of Greenwich. So we covered Greenwich and that side of London. And so there were 5 teams at each base. So 4 times 5 is
Yeah.
20. And then so every 5 weeks you'd be on call and you'd provide 24/7 cover, and you'd separate your team. And any murders that came in your area, you would be the ones that would have to respond to them.
Right. I picked up something in your book, and I think it's funny because it's very much the police humour and logic in our thinking too. We're on call. We'd start on a Monday, or sometimes it start midweek. They shifted it around sometimes. But as you got towards the end of the on-call period, because it was sort of the phone could ring at any time of night, you never slept really well, you couldn't get on the drink, you're virtually just waiting for the call to happen. And then if we looked like we got through the weekend, some idiot would say, geez, it's been a quiet on-call period, and that was that was a jinx. And I saw in your book, someone mentioned that I can't believe how quiet it is, and you all in the office looked at the person and going,
You don't. We call it the Q word. You don't use the Q word.
I didn't realise, out of all the things that I didn't realise impacted on me as much when I was in homicide, was the joy of not being on call. Now, when I'd be on call, and I did it over 20 years being on call, so every 6 weeks or more, you'd have a week out of your life where you had to make sure you're ready to respond and go anywhere. But when I started the first day of on call, I wanted something to happen to get it out of the way, because it was almost just hanging there waiting for it. Oh no, I don't want to get through 5 nights sleep, and then almost at the end, and then you get the case. Did you feel that when you're on call, the pressure of being on call, and you don't realize how heavy it is until you step away from it?
No, mate, 100%. Yeah, no, everything you're saying resonates with me so much. Yeah, on call is a funny old thing. You basically have to write your life off. You can't plan anything, do anything, because
Yeah.
Sod's Law says if you were to have a family party, something was going to come along, and you're not going to be able to make it. But I one of the things I really appreciate now about not being in the police is I feel like I've got my life back in terms of, so I love football, soccer,
Yep.
and so. When the World Cup was on, I could never guarantee I could watch the games. If my
Yeah.
mates were going out having a drink, I could kind of commit to it, but there's always that off chance. Even when I wasn't on call, there's a good chance I'm going to have to cancel family parties, theatre tickets, New Year's Eve parties. So much of my life I had to cancel.
Yeah.
And it's quite a nice feeling now to when I say I'm going to do something, I can commit to it, and I'm not going to let people down. And I felt like throughout basically because I was a detective quite early. I think being a detective more than in uniform, you have this, is that I was continually letting people down, continually missing birthday parties for the kids and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice now that, like I say, if someone says I've got a wedding, I can go, yeah, I can RSVP and say, yeah, I'm going to be there, which is a nice feeling.
Yeah, I understand. I understand, because you couldn't commit, and it felt like you tempted fate if you decide, oh yeah, I'll try. Hopefully it'll stay quiet, and you virtually guarantee that something was going to come in. Let's talk about murders now. Like, you get a call, a response to a body being found in, whether it's in a private home or in the public, and to solve a murder, these questions, and again from your book, but I'll just break it down, and then we'll talk about what actually happens. You're looking at things. Who is the victim? What happened? Where did it happen? When did it happen? Why did it happen? And how did it happen? When you break it down there, it seems very simple, but it's far from a simple process. But sometimes it's easier to put a structure and trying to work out what's happened. So talk us through, and you can reference cases you've worked on if you like, what your response is when you're on call, you get a call, and there's been a situation that you've got to respond to. What type of thing are you likely to be confronted with?
Yeah, so first off, it's a really important time, because if you don't get it right at the beginning of a murder, those first hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is, you can't get that time back. So there's a lot of pressure on you. And one of the things that you also know is that every decision you make and everything you do now at this early stage is going to be poured over by clever lawyers later on who are going to have months and months to second guess what you've had to decisions you've had to make in seconds. So there is a lot of pressure on you. So you go in there knowing you've got to get it right. So and what we do in the UK, detectives don't use blue lights and sirens generally, but on a homicide team we do. So you need to get there as quickly as possible. So you get in the car, blue lights and sirens to get there, and we call it the golden hour. That time immediately after a murder, and it's when sort of the evidence is most abundantly there. There's going to be chances to solve the case there that if you don't get it right, you're going to lose. It's really important. So you've got all that pressure on you. And also as well, like, you know, it's like when you're driving blue lights and sirens, your adrenaline's going anyway.
Yeah.
So your adrenaline's through the roof by the time you get there. More often than not, you're going to get there and it's chaos, and there's going to be so much going on. And the moment you turn up, the local officers are going to be looking at you. You get this look. I'm sure you've seen it, where they're so relieved that you're there because you can now take the pressure. If something's going to go wrong, it's down to you. Exactly. So you get that. And what we do in the UK, we train our detectives to use a system that, because you've got all that adrenaline going through your system, because you know that pressure's on you, you don't want to make mistakes. We use a system known as the 5 building blocks, and it's just simple steps you can go through when you're at a crime scene, when you've got all that pressure on you. And it needs to be simple, because if you're working in pressure, you can't be trying to think of some complicated, convoluted way of investigating a murder. You need to break it down into something very, very simple. So we use these 5 steps, and it's preservation of life, preservation of scene, securing of evidence, identify victim, identify and arrest suspects. So there are 5 steps you go through. So the first one, preservation of life. So obviously, the major thing in any police officer's role is that preservation of life. We're there to protect people.
Yeah.
So, and that may sound, well, they're dead. You've been called there a homicide, but you have to think about things like, so if you were to go to a house and there was a dead body in the living room, well, have you checked upstairs? Do we know for a fact there aren't any other victims? Because you do end up at scenes where there are multiple victims. And the last thing you want is to have someone bleeding out upstairs because the police have just seen a dead body downstairs and haven't thought about it. So you're thinking about that. Then the preservation of scene, and that's where we use cordons, and we're trying to make it a situation where nobody's going to be interfering with evidence or trampling over DNA, that kind of thing. Then securing of evidence. So I'm not talking about fingerprints and DNA. I'm talking about evidence that would be there, that would be lost. So, for instance, witnesses. There might be quick win CCTVs. If you check CCTV quickly, it might give you the suspect. It could be a weapon's been discarded, or some clothing's been discarded. But things that you've got to think about getting hold of quickly. Yeah. Then identification of victim, because as I said before, if you understand a victim in their life, you've got a much better chance of solving a murder.
Gives you a line of inquiry, doesn't it? Just on the preservation of the crime scene, I understand the preservation of life. That's an obvious thing, and there's also the potential threat. If there's a dead body there, is a killer still around? Who knows? Yeah. Like, there's been circumstances where the killer's been found there, and it could have inflicted more damage on people. But the preservation of the crime scene is crucial. I'm sure it's similar to you, inner and outer perimeter, a crime scene log, who goes in there, you keep everyone out. No one needs to go in there unless they need to be in there. But the chaos that you've just described, it is that way. And quite often it's 2 o'clock in the morning, or lack of sleep, and you've turned up there and people are running around. There's a lot of emotion. And it is just breaking it down, doing the simple things, but doing them properly, isn't it? Making sure that you've set up all the steps.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there are certain skills I think you need to be a detective. And one of them is be able to make good decisions. And you're being asked to make decisions on the fly, right? You got to make them now. You can't go home and think about it for an hour. You've got to make a decision there and then. So I always had a system in my mind of how I came to making decisions, because you're not always going to get it right, but you need to have thought it through to a point where you can at least justify yourself in court. Because it's very easy months later to say, well, you should have done that. Well, yeah, I should have done, but on the information I had, that was what I felt was the right decision. And what we do is, so what I would do when I would turn up at a murder scene is I would have I'd call him my scribe. I'd have a DC with me writing down. So if one of the first things I'll do when I turn up to the murder scene is I need to identify which officer there can give me the information I need to go about investigating this crime. And that might be the senior officer, it might be the first on scene, but I need to get information from them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to want to know from them what has happened and what have you done. And then I'm going to be starting to ask questions. I'm going to be starting to make decisions, telling them to do things. And I would have a DC writing down what I was saying. And that's really important because later on, when you're asked, well, why did you do that? What did you tell them to do? That kind of thing. You can't write and talk and record everything and remember everything. And it all comes down. So one of the things that you have to, that point where you get in the car and you drive into the murder scene,
Yeah.
whether consciously or subconsciously, you're thinking about court, because everything you do is about the what plays out in the trial. Everything, the decisions you make now in the first 10 minutes are going to impact what happens at the trial. So you always have to have that on your mind. So yeah, I've only just got here. I might have only been here 5 minutes, but this decision I'm making now I could be in the box justifying it a year later. So recording everything you do is so important when it comes to that all the way through a murder investigation, but definitely at the beginning.
I understand what you're saying, because there is so much accountability in when you're investigating a homicide. I was taught by people that taught me, and when we talk about what I do or that, and I know you acknowledge it, it's such a team effort, and we'll talk about the components of the team. It's not one individual, but we're always taught that you're a homicide on call. Once you've been notified, you're going to have to make decisions from there. You're going to have to contact the person at the scene and make sure the scene's preserved. You're responsible for it from the time that you've been notified about it. So the decisions you've got to be able to justify. Having a scribe, I know, and it seems like a thankless task, but when I was in that position where I needed someone that could make notes of all the decisions I'm making, I would pick someone that I relied upon heavily, someone that I could trust, because you knew how crucial it was that you had those records that you could be able to produce and justify your decisions when you come to court. So you've preserved the crime scene, you've made the decisions. You talk CCTV footage, which is it's grown exponentially, the type of electronic data you can get. Canvassing of the area, interviewing witnesses. What's your thought on canvassing? Because again, that's something that was drummed into me very early in my homicide career, and it's something I like to think I passed on. The importance of speaking to people right at the time when this incident's occurred, finding out who was in the area, that type of thing.
Yeah, 100%. So we have two different ways of doing that. We have what's known as directed local inquiries. So that's where you are there at the very beginning and you're saying, right, these are the houses that overlook the murder scene. Let's go and knock on the doors, speak to the people there, and see if anybody saw or heard anything. One of the things that those 5 steps I was talking about, and one of the fifth one is arresting the suspect. I don't want to jump ahead, but
yeah.
It's so important that if you can get hold of a suspect and arrest them, the sooner you do it, the better chance you've got of convicting them, because you've got more chance of getting their DNA, DNA from the victim, blood from the victim, the murder weapon, any property that's been stolen, their telephone. There's so much you can get. And if you go knocking on the door, all you need is that nosy neighbour to say, well, actually, yeah, I was looking out the window, and actually, here's the registration number of the car. And if you don't go knocking on the doors, you're not going to find that. So that's directed local inquiries, and then we have what we call house to house, and that's a more strategic, long-term thing where it might be the days that follow, and it's all really thought out about where you're going to knock, what questions you're going to ask, are you going to take descriptions of the people you're speaking to, where are you going to do it? So there's those 2 stages, but those more often than not, there's those directed local inquiries, that initial ones where you're knocking on the door, where you're going to get that really important information that's going to push your investigation on.
There's so much that can be gained by being methodical in the way that you gather that information.
Yeah, mate, 100%. I mean, solving a murder is about just trying to get those little bits of information, and then you're pulling them all together. And somehow you've been here, Gary, where you're at the beginning of a murder inquiry, and you think, how the hell are we going to solve this one? I mean, this looks like, we call them a sticker. This looks like it's going to be a sticker. Where are we going with this? and then just one tiny little bit of information from a little old lady potentially that was just walking past or something like that can completely and utterly change everything. Because you get that red car, and then when you look at the red car, you can look at CCTV, you can look at ANPR, you can look at intelligence to see who drives a red. And I mean, it can change an investigation, just one tiny little piece of information.
Let's delve into the importance of finding out about the victim now. Victimology, we refer to it over here. I think you probably use the same terminology, but invariably, the answer to finding out who killed this person comes from who this person was, who this person associated with. You know, you do get random murders, but they're rarer. The person in the wrong place at the wrong time. Invariably, it's someone connected to that person or the lifestyle of that person that might potentially lead to them becoming a victim. How much weight do you place on victimology, and how do you approach it at homicide scenes or at the early stages of the investigation, finding out who the victim is? Because I found, until we found out who the victim was, I was always, because part of the role when you're running the investigation was identifying lines of inquiry. And quite often when you hadn't found out who the victim was, it was hard to find where do we start with it. As you said, you get overwhelmed with, this is going to be a tough one.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, completely. I mean, you can't overemphasize the importance of victimology.
Yeah.
In the UK, the government publish figures every year. They really, I love stats, so I geek out on these stats every year when they publish them. But they're really interesting that they break it down into the relationship between a suspect and a victim, and it's really, so off the top of my head, it's something like less than 10% of women are killed by strangers, and it was more for men. It was like maybe 13 or 15%.
Yeah.
So that shows that in the vast majority of murders, there is a link between the victim
Yeah.
and the killer, and it's your job to try and identify that link. So you're looking into their life for any kind of motive. Is there someone within their life that is an obvious suspect, or is there an aspect of their life that would lend itself to a motive, or what could somebody gain from killing from murdering them? Has there been some kind of event that's triggered this? So looking into their life, you've got and building up that picture, you've got much better chance of solving a crime. And as you say, if you don't know who the victim is, you then just reliant on what evidence is there at the scene. Has
Yeah.
someone seen something? Is there CCTV? Is there forensics?
Because what that was always gave the kick along to an investigation once you identified who the victim is too. If you didn't know who the victim was, you didn't have a starting point for their lifestyle. So that would open up all sorts of lines of inquiry and double, triple the workload at that particular point in time in a good way. Post-mortem examinations. The importance of that, again, can't be underestimated. People, I think, wondered, well, you've got a forensic pathologist going there to examine the body. Why are you sending detectives there? But I've always found that it was a crucial part of the investigation to have a detective there while the post-mortem examination was going on, so you could find out more about how the crime was committed and what actually took place. What's your thoughts on attendance at post-mortems?
It's crucial. It's crucial. I could come up with an example. So we had this crime. It was quite a brutal one, really. It was two men in a flat, and one of them had been stabbed. I've got off the top of my head now. It was something like 60, 70 times, and he'd had his face really basically caved in with an iron. I mean, it was a really brutal one. And then his flatmate was in the front room. He had 27 stab wounds to his back and stuff. So it was a really, really brutal crime. So imagine there's lots of blood. And it wasn't actually a detective; it was the crime scene manager. And the crime scene manager is a really important role in the UK. They're a civilian; they're not a detective, but they are almost like they're CSI promoted. So they started off as a scenes of crime officer, and then they've been promoted. And so we were there. There was detectives there, crime scene manager, and the forensic pathologist. And part of the job is obviously the pathologist looking to identify how the person died and the circumstances around it, but also looking to retrieve samples from the body that can be tested for DNA, etc. And he was doing this, and the CSM pointed at. So you imagine a body that's got a lot of blood on it, but on his toe there was a drop of blood. So like if someone had a nosebleed, the blood looked like it had dropped onto his toe, and he was laying in bed. So how could this blood have got there? And the pathologist was like, well, there's lots of blood, and the CSM was really strong on it. It was like, no, no, look, that just doesn't look right. That drop of blood on his toe doesn't fit with the rest of it.
Yep.
So he essentially made it made the pathologist sample this blood on the toe, and it came back as the suspect. The one bit of DNA we had, the one bit of evidence we had that can link him to the crime scene.
Yep.
Because when you're stabbing someone in a frenzy, there's a good chance you're going to cut your own hand,
Yep.
because knives don't have hilts, and that's why in the old days swords had hilts, so that stop your hand traveling up the sword and slipping. But when someone's stabbing in a frenzy, there's a good chance they're going to cut their hand. And that it was essentially that bit of evidence that completely and utterly blew the case open. And although we were looking at this person, we couldn't put him in the crime scene.
Yeah.
And this blood did it. And if we just left it to the pathologist to just crack on and do that, that would have been missed, and there's a good chance that person would now be walking free, as opposed to having got 37 years in prison, which they got.
Well, that's
So it's crucial.
Again, that attention to detail, and you talk about the crime scene officers, and we had some great ones there, and they were a wealth of experience that comes from years and years and years of turning up at these crime scenes and just being able to look at things a little bit differently and a little bit clearer on it. I saw in your book you talked about you like to stand still in a crime scene when all the chaos is set, and then put yourself in the crime scene and try to visualize, not in a fanciful way, but just get a sense of, okay, what took place here. Talk us about that, because I'm a big believer in that too. I think you can learn a lot if you're going to be investigating a crime, getting a real sense by just standing and getting a feel of what's gone on.
It sounds so simple, but it's such an important. I wouldn't say it's even a skill. It's just something that a detective should do. Is just stand still. And so many detectives don't do that, and a lot of it comes down to when I was talking earlier about that adrenaline when you're turning up at a crime scene and you've got all that chaos. Sometimes it's very difficult to center yourself and say, right, I need to just slow myself down, and just standing still and just looking around, looking up, looking down, and trying to take in what you see, not just looking around, but trying to interpret what you see, and trying, if there's, I don't know, if there might be something out of place within a bedroom, and if you're not looking out for that, you won't see it, because you're just looking at around a room, and you're trying to interpret it. So for instance, that crime scene I was talking about, on the bed there were a pair of trousers, and the pockets were turned out. So when you're looking at that, you think, right, okay, so why would somebody be going through it? Is robbery a motive? So just tiny little things like that, and it's so easy to miss if you do get caught up in that. "Oh, I'm running around. I need to solve this crime, and I'm under pressure. Da, da, da." Just stop, slow down. Outside the crime scene, just have a look around. Look at everything around this crime scene. And another thing I used to do as well is, because of that chaos, go back to that crime scene and do that exercise when everyone else has gone, because you get a very different feel for a crime scene once all the police officers have gone, the blue lights have gone, the crowds that are there taking pictures. Once all that chaos has gone, you get a much different feel for a crime scene and what it would have been like at the time a murder took place. And I always found that a really valuable exercise for me to understand that crime scene, and not what I was presented with that night when it was chaos. And another thing as well that I always used to do is, you go back and just mingle with the people that are there. And children were a great one. So I grew up, like, on the estates I grew up on. I knew what was going on. The police officers didn't. They didn't live there. I was hanging around on the street corners. I knew what was going on. So just wander and just have a really relaxed chat with some of the kids that are hanging around, and you'd be shocked at what they tell you, because they know what's going on. So it's just little things like that that's not written down in a book. You don't get a manual on how to solve these crimes. But as you're saying, you got handed down information from people that have been there before, and I did, and you just pick up on these little things that can. All right, 9 times out of 10, it might not lead anywhere, but it's just that one time you might speak to a kid and say, "Oh yeah, I saw him the other day having an argument with Joe Bloggs," and actually, when you look at Joe Bloggs, and you suddenly you can then put him at the crime scene with his phones or whatever. So yeah, there's little nuances like that in an investigation that can be so important.
The other thing about homicide that I don't think people appreciate is the sheer volume of information that can come in very early. And you can sometimes be overwhelmed by the information. And I pay homage to the people that passed on their skill set to me, and it's almost like a lineage that gets passed down. But people would often say, what happens when you go to a homicide? And from our point of view and what I was shown, just make sure you've got the information system set up properly. And that might be as simple as having an in tray where pieces of information are coming in. Set up your computer system. You've got Homes. Over here in New South Wales, we had a system called COPS, not dissimilar to what you have with Homes. But the importance of getting on top of the chaos of the information that comes in so you can gather, assess, collate, and then allocate tasks flowing from that. Do you want to talk on information management of information in a homicide investigation? Because it's not the sexy topic. It's not the topic that gets shown on the TV shows, but it's crucial.
Yeah, look, Gary, I'll be honest. I Holmes bored me to tears. I'll be brutally honest. I was the sort of I wanted to be out and about. I didn't want to be in an office dealing with Holmes, but it's so important because, as you say, you're getting thousands of bits of information coming in, and you've got to be able to collate that, cross-reference it. And so, what happened in the UK is we in the 1970s, I want to say now. Oh, yeah, it was the 70s. We had the Yorkshire Ripper. And Peter Sutcliffe killed 13 women in Yorkshire.
Yeah, and it was a horrendous crime. Yeah,
it was, but so many lessons have been learnt from that. So one of the what went wrong is they didn't have a computer system; they had a paper system.
Yeah,
and he was committing murders across multiple policing areas. And so when he was eventually identified as the killer, he appeared in all their different various bits of paperwork, in that he had been interviewed by the police 9 times.
Yeah.
And there was no way of cross-referencing those. So unless you had an officer that happened across his name, remembered it and whatever. But the problem was you had so much paperwork in different police forces, none of it was being married up. That out of that, you think how many times? And there was a note at the end from a friend of his saying, "I think Peter Sutcliffe is the Yorkshire Ripper," and they found this note. So that was a turning point really in homicide investigations in the UK. Like, well, this cannot happen again. So Holmes was introduced. Holmes stands for Home Office Large Major Inquiry System. I mean, they really shoehorned that in, haven't they? They make it look like Sherlock Holmes, but they've come up with that, and it is really, really important. Yeah. And as I say, it's not the sexy side of policing, and it wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy it, but I understood the importance of it to your investigation.
Yeah, and it's something that, and again, when you putting together or bringing together an investigation team, there were some people that bought into that type of stuff. They loved it. The computer geeks, that was their area of expertise. When I would put a team together for a murder investigation, you can't always get the ones you want. Sometimes it's whatever's available. But I would try to get a cross section of skills across on a team, because you need that mix in a team. You don't want everyone like you or me running out the door chasing crooks with no one's doing the information management. But it's crucial to build that up. And when you talk about being in the witness box at court, you feel good when you know you've set your information management system up properly. Yes, we received 2,000 calls from Crime Stoppers. We filed them, and you know where all the information's gone and things weren't missed. It's funny you talk about the Yorkshire Ripper, because I think our skill set in homicide investigation was vastly improved by the Ivan Milat, the backpacker murderer, and also we had he murdered seven people, and Granny Killer, which was another one that was operating around the North Shore of Sydney and killed 6 people. And it was that type of pressure where information, where investigations were operating in, let's say, silos, and the information wasn't being passed on, and lessons were learnt from that. So it is an improved system. The other, I think we'll go now to when you've identified the victim, because I think this is at the heart and soul of homicide investigations too. Because when we talk about people's lives being impacted upon, it has an impact on families. It's not just one person, it's like a ripple effect, and it's a generational impact. But I just want to read something that, and I think if you've been in homicide long enough or a police officer long enough, you've had to deliver the horrible messages, and how hard that is to knock on someone's door and know that you're going to destroy their lives by the information you've got. And this is what you said, talking about notifying the families. When you've identified who the victim is, the family mightn't be aware, and you've gone to inform them. You know the next words that come out of your mouth will change their lives forever, and they are unlikely to ever forget what you say. That makes choosing the right words so important. There is no easy way and no right way, but there can be a wrong way. For me, it was always a balance between leaving them in no doubt, but being as sympathetic as possible. Your words talking about informing families of their loved ones being murdered. Do you want to talk us through your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you've been there, Gary. It's you feel. I don't know what the word would be, but you feel like it is so important for the rest of their lives. The words that are going to come out of your mouth now, and if I say there is no right, there's nobody can say to you, these are the words you have to say.
Yeah.
So there's no right way. But if you mess it up, you know that's what they're going to remember. This scenario now for you is this is your job. This is their life, and they're going to replay this over and over again for the rest of their life. And you feel that pressure. You feel like I need to get this message across. I need to make it clear so there is no. But there's different stages of grief, and one of those is denial. And quite often, that's the first thing you'll get when you tell someone that their loved one's dead. They will be in denial. They'll be like, "No, it can't be them. I just spoke to them. They're fine. It can't be them." So you need it's almost cruel to sort of deliver it in a way where there's almost hope in there. So you have to be definitive. You have to make it clear to them that no, your loved one's dead. But you don't want to deliver it in a blunt way. You need to deliver it you need to sugarcoat it in a way that isn't going to completely destroy them. It's such a hard thing, and it's. I did feel that pressure because even now, I think back to when I've done that. To me, I have to really try and think about it. But to them, I'm imagining my face is one of those things that they'll always remember because of that message I delivered to them, and it's hard, isn't it?
It is hard, and it stays with you. And I've got images of walking up the driveway or knocking on the door, and the moment the door's open, they know something's up, or they might have reported their child missing, or something like that. And you carry it for a long time. And I think with the families too, like the relationship that you have with the families, and you talk about the family liaison officer and people that keep the families informed. Think the worst possible news, the worst possible event of their life, and you remind them of it because you're the one that brought the news to it. It's very very heavy stuff. But I read that out because it is important what you said, because I know you can't hedge your bets. You can't go, oh look, we think it is this person. You're not telling them it's a person unless you know it's a person, so you can't hedge your bets, and it feels so cruel, but there's no good way of saying it, and you don't know how the people are going to react. I've had people react in every way you could imagine: complete denial, aggression, or just collapse on the floor. You just don't know, but you do carry it with you, and those type of things, I think, for a homicide detective also give you strength to make sure you do everything humanly possible to find out what's happened to their loved one.
There's a section of my book, and I write about are all murders treated equally, and in terms of like do you differentiate in how you investigate one murder to another? The simple answer is no. You give your all to every murder you investigate. But there is no doubt that you become emotionally invested in others more. For me, it was always about children. If I'm investigating the murder of a child, I become emotionally invested in it. And you're on that journey with the family, that journey through the initial stages where they've just found out. It could have been you that told them about it. The number one question I always got with families at the initial stage was why?
Yeah.
Why did this happen? Why is my loved one dead? And so you're there trying to find the answer to them for that. You go on that journey through the investigation, get through the charge, going through the trial, and you do become you do get close to them. You're in the worst, their worst nightmare stage of their life. You're with them through that, and you can't help but become emotionally attached to them.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to be some kind of robot not to.
Yeah. The other, like the double-edged part of it too, but sometimes the family members are the suspect, and you've got to play that role of the sympathetic, caring cop that's delivered this horrendous news, then looking at the way they react and keeping an eye open on whether it is are they involved. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I have one. I'm not sure if you have a similar one, but there was a certain person that he was an uncle of the victim, and at the time that we were notifying the family, we were not 100% sure, but had some good red flags indicating that he might have been the person responsible for it. And I remember we knocked on the for the murder, and it was a horrific, sexually motivated murder. It was a horrendous one. We've knocked on the door, and the family's answered the door and said, with the proper empathy that is required for this, gone in and said, look, we've got some bad news. Do you want to sit down? Is there anyone else here? And they sat on the lounge and said, look, we've identified this body that we found at such and such. And there was genuine grief in the room. Our suspect was doing his best to cry, like had his head down, hands in his face. And I remember he looked up at me in pretend while he's trying to cry and said, "Do you think they'll solve it?" And I said, "I'm 100% certain we'll solve it." And you should have seen the look on his face. I still remember that, and that still brings a smile to my face. That he knew that at that point in time he was stuffed, and we didn't have enough to arrest him at that stage, but we certainly we fired the first shot, and the look on his face was it was something I'll never forget. So.
Yeah.
But,
so as you're talking, so we've mentioned a family liaison officer. I think even in the police, certainly in the UK, people don't understand the role of a family liaison officer. They think it's some sort of pink and fluffy. It's like there for tea and sympathy type thing. It's not. They're a detective. They're an investigator, and I mean, in those type of investigations, it comes to the fore. It's like you're putting somebody into that family situation, and what you're talking about, they're looking for the clues, picking up on what they're saying, how they're reacting is so important. And that, as I say, that they're an investigator and they're building up that picture of the victim's life, and they're central to that. So in those situations, they're crucial.
They are crucial, Stephen, and I learnt a bit because quite often families that you come into contact with haven't had dealings with police before, and it breaks my heart sometimes and we've appointed family liaison officers as well. It's a role that we used to do organically. You do it naturally, but sometimes it'd be forgotten when you get caught up in the speed of the investigation. And a family spoke to me that they haven't had dealings with police, and they had my number to contact me if they wanted to contact me, and we're busy with the investigation. And they contacted me months later, and they were livid that hadn't been in contact with them, and I was shocked because I said, any questions you've got, here's a number, any time of day or night. But they were of the view, they are law-abiding citizens, and they thought, we can't disrupt the detective inspector. He's busy doing work. We can't just phone him up. And it broke my heart that they felt that way. But it is an important role, and it's not the fluffy cake eating type role. There's a investigative aspect to it as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and as well as, I mean, they are so they're dual role really. So first and foremost, it's about being an investigator, but they're also there for the family. So when you've lost someone through murder, there are certain procedures that are going to have to go through the coronial procedures we have over here. So identifying the body, there'll be an inquest, releasing the body for the funeral, keeping them updated to progress of the investigation. They'll be there at court with them so that they can help them through the trial, explaining things, etc. So that they do have that it's not a counselling role, but they're almost like a crutch for the family,
Yeah.
in that they're the port of call. So you're right. I mean, calling the detective inspector, it probably isn't something that's going to be easy to do. Whereas having your family liaison officer, you can just drop a WhatsApp to whatever, is a much easier way of if you've got a question, you can ask it. So as when I was one of the senior officers, I would always at a very early stage meet with the family,
Yep.
introduce myself, let them know if they've got any questions. You ask me whatever questions you got. But
Yeah.
going forward, John and Sarah, they're your points of contact. If
Yep.
you've got any questions of me, to go via them. That was an
Yeah.
important part.
That makes sense. Well, Steve, we could talk all day and night. We're going to take a break now, and when we get back, we're going to take the next step forward in terms of homicide investigation, lines of inquiry, interview room, time of arrest. When do you arrest someone? When do you move on someone? And a whole range of aspects that come out with homicide. So take a break and back for part 2 shortly.
All right, cool.